The dust storm appeared without warning, a writhing wall of sand and debris that devoured the horizon. Mitchell Calloway reined in his horse, one hand shielding his eyes as he squinted into the approaching maelstrom. Something wasn't right. The sky had been clear moments ago, the air still. At the edge of the storm, a small silhouette materialized. A girl, no more than 13, her dark hair dancing wildly in the wind. She stood with arms outstretched, palms up, as if conducting an invisible orchestra. Behind her, a taller figure hurried forward, tugging urgently at her sleeve. Mitchell leaned forward in his saddle. This was no ordinary dust storm. It moved against the wind, swirling with unnatural purpose. The girl turned, her face momentarily visible. Their eyes met across the distance, hers dark as obsidian, alive with something ancient and powerful. Then she was gone, swallowed by the churning wall of sand that rushed toward him. Mitchell wheeled his horse around and galloped for cover, the roar of the storm drowning out the thunder of hooves. He found shelter beneath an overhanging rock just as the sand hit, a howling fury that scoured the landscape. Through squinted eyes, he glimpsed shadows moving within the storm, impossible shapes that vanished when he tried to focus on them. "What in God's name?" he muttered, the medallion around his neck suddenly cold against his skin. 2 weeks earlier, the whiskey burned a familiar trail down Mitchell Calloway's throat, a momentary distraction from the ghosts that haunted him. The Broken Spurs Saloon in Santa Fe was quiet this evening, just a handful of patrons seeking refuge from their own demons. Mitchell studied the wanted poster spread before him on the weathered bar. Frank Holloway's illustrated face stared back, a professor of geology from Denver University, wanted for the murder of the Henderson family. The reward? $500. "Another?" Pete the barkeep asked, already reaching for the bottle. Mitchell nodded, pushing his empty glass forward. The whiskey couldn't drown the memories, but it dulled their edges, made them bearable for a time. 10 years since Sand Creek, yet the images remained vivid. Bodies frozen in the snow, women and children cut down as they fled. He hadn't participated in the massacre itself, but he'd arrived the day after. What he found had changed him forever. His fingers traced the edge of the silver medallion hanging around his neck, a simple circle stamped with a thunderbird, the only remnant of a fateful encounter with an Apache woman who'd pulled him, bleeding and delirious, from a ravine after a Comanche ambush. She'd nursed him back to health with herbs and poultices when his own regiment had left him for dead. Months later, he'd been ordered to hunt down bands from her very tribe. The bitter taste of that betrayal still lingered. "Here they spotted Holloway near Pecos," Pete said, interrupting Mitchell's dark thoughts. "Trading with Apache, some say." Mitchell raised an eyebrow. "Apache territory is dangerous ground these days." "Dangerous for a professor, certainly." Pete leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Word is he's not alone. Has some Indian girl with him. Strange one, according to Mexican traders." Before Mitchell could inquire further, the saloon doors swung open. 3 men entered, spurs announcing their arrival with metallic chimes against the wooden floor. The leader, a broad-shouldered man with a graying beard and cold eyes, scanned the room before his gaze settled on Mitchell. "Well, look what the wind dragged in," the man drawled. "Captain Mitchell Calloway himself." Mitchell didn't turn. "Sergeant Redgrave, thought you'd be dead by now." Victor Redgrave laughed, a sound like stones rattling in a tin can. He approached the bar, flanking himself with his 2 companions, one young and nervous, the other scarred and silent. "Boys, this here's the famous Captain Calloway. Led the charge at Canyon de Chelly. How many Apache did you send to their maker that day, Captain?" Mitchell's hand tightened around his glass. "Not enough to include you, apparently." Redgrave smirked, leaning against the bar. Up close, Mitchell could smell the trail dust and sweat that clung to him. "Heard you're hunting Holloway. Funny coincidence. So are we." "Nothing funny about it. 500 draws flies." "We ain't flies, Captain. We're businessmen." Redgrave lowered his voice. "Speaking of business, heard something interesting from a Mexican trader yesterday. Said he saw a man matching Holloway's description trading with Apache near the old mission ruins at Pecos." Mitchell's interest peaked despite himself. "Trading what?" "Books and papers for safe passage, apparently." Redgrave leaned closer. "But that ain't the most interesting part. Trader said Holloway had a little Indian girl with him, Apache, by her clothes. Something cold settled in Mitchell's stomach. A child? Redgrave shrugged. Maybe, or maybe he's gone native. Wouldn't be the first white man to lose his mind out there. He straightened. Of course, we plan to find out. Leaving at first light. The territory marshal should handle this, Mitchell said. Marshall's 3 days' ride from here, if he bothers coming at all. Redgrave smiled, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. 500 doesn't wait, Captain, plus whatever the girl fetches. Mitchell stood slowly, his 6-foot frame unfolding like a blade. What did you say? Redgrave didn't back down. You heard me. Apache girl will fetch a good price from certain establishments in Mexico. Exotic, you know. The young companion shifted uncomfortably. Sarge, maybe we should... Shut it, Davis, Redgrave snapped before turning back to Mitchell. What's it to you, anyway? Thought you were done with Indians after Apache. The name hit Mitchell like a physical blow. Apache, the incident that had finally broken him. The reason he'd turned in his commission and walked away from everything he knew. Leave the girl out of it, Mitchell said, voice deadly quiet. Redgrave laughed. Or what, Captain? You'll read me regulations? Those days are done. The saloon had gone silent, other patrons sensing the storm brewing between the two men. Pete had subtly moved the whiskey bottle away from the edge of the bar. I'm telling you as a courtesy, Mitchell said. The girl isn't part of the bounty. And I'm telling you, Redgrave leaned in closer, that I take what opportunities present themselves. It's a hard world, Captain. Thought you'd learned that lesson by now. Mitchell's hand moved with fluid grace. The Colt peacemaker pressed against Redgrave's ribs before the sergeant could blink. Last warning. Redgrave went still, then slowly raised his hands. Easy now, just talking business. His eyes hardened. But this ain't over, Calloway. It is for tonight. Redgrave backed away, gesturing for his companions to follow. At the door he turned. Apache broke you, didn't it? Made you soft. He spat on the floor. Apache killed my brother at Bascom. Killed him slow. Remember that when you were feeling sympathetic? The door swung shut behind them and gradually conversation resumed in the saloon. Mitchell holstered his weapon, his hands steady despite the rage coursing through him. Pete slid another whiskey across the bar. On the house. Thought you might need it. Mitchell nodded his thanks and drained the glass. I'm leaving tonight. Redgrave won't wait till morning no matter what he says. You sure about this, Calloway? Getting mixed up in Apache business again? Mitchell stared at the empty glass, seeing reflected in its curved surface the ghosts of a decade past. No, he said honestly, I'm not sure about anything anymore. The desert night embraced Mitchell like an old lover as he rode out of Santa Fe. The moon hung full and white, painting the landscape in silver and shadow. His horse, a sturdy Mustang named Shadow, moved with quiet confidence across terrain they both knew well. Mitchell traveled light. Bedroll, canteen, jerky, ammunition, and a small bundle of supplies wrapped in oilcloth. A lifetime in the saddle had taught him that speed trumped comfort when tracking human prey. And Frank Holloway was indeed prey, though something about this hunt felt wrong. Holloway had been a respected geology professor before suddenly disappearing 6 months ago. The murders seemed out of character for an academic with no violent history. The child complicated things further. Why would a murderer take a child, and an Apache child at that? As he rode, Mitchell's thoughts wandered to the shadow that had ended his military career. Apache. Even now, the word felt like a stone in his gut. Sand Creek had been horror enough, arriving a day after to witness the slaughter. But Apache had demanded his direct complicity. Colonel Harrington had slapped a map on the table, finger jabbing at an Apache camp. Wipe them out, he'd ordered. Every last one. When Mitchell's scouts confirmed women and children made up most of the camp, he'd torn off his insignia and thrown it at Harrington's feet. Find someone else for your butchery. The colonel had him arrested for insubordination while dispatching Captain Reynolds to finish the job. By nightfall, the valley of Abacu had become a charnel house. 37 Apache souls silenced forever, most of them innocents. The screams from the survivors who'd fled into the hills haunted him still. A week later, Mitchell turned in his commission and walked away from the only life he knew. For 10 years, he'd drifted, taking bounties on men whose crimes were clear-cut. Murderers, rapists, thieves, men who deserved what was coming to them. Men whose capture might, in some small way, balance the scales he'd helped tip. The distant howl of a coyote brought Mitchell back to the present. He'd been riding for hours, following tracks that only experienced eyes could discern in the moonlight. Redgrave and his men had indeed left before him, their trail heading southeast toward Pecos. By dawn, Mitchell had reached the ruins of the old mission. The stone walls stood like sentinels against the rising sun, shadows stretching long across the dusty ground. He dismounted, leading Shadow to a small stream nearby, and studied the area. Multiple hoofprints marked the earth. Redgrave and his companions had been here, but so had others. Smaller prints, lighter, a child perhaps, and distinctive boot prints that Mitchell recognized as the pattern of custom-made boots described in Holloway's wanted poster. They had been here no more than a day ago. Mitchell tethered Shadow in the shade and moved through the ruins, rifle ready. The mission's main building stood relatively intact, its thick walls defying both time and weather. Inside, the cool darkness was a blessed relief from the mounting heat. Signs of recent occupation were evident. Ashes of a small fire, scraps of food, and pages torn from a book, covered with strange symbols and diagrams. Mitchell knelt, collecting the pages, noting the careful handwriting that matched descriptions of Holloway's penmanship. A slight sound, the barest whisper of movement, made Mitchell freeze. He turned slowly, rifle raised. "Come out," he called softly. "I won't hurt you." Silence answered him. Then, from behind a fallen beam, a small figure emerged. A girl, perhaps 13, with dark eyes that reflected no light and skin the color of burnished copper. She wore traditional Apache clothing, though torn and dirty from travel. A rawhide cord around her neck held a small stone talisman. Kiona? Mitchell tried the name Redgrave had mentioned, his pronunciation clumsy. The girl's expression didn't change, but her eyes flickered with recognition. She shook her head slightly. "My name is Mitchell," he said, keeping his voice gentle. He lowered his rifle slowly. "I'm looking for a man, Frank Holloway." He reached into his pocket and withdrew the wanted poster, holding it up for her to see. The girl glanced at the image, then back at Mitchell. She said something in Apache, a language Mitchell recognized but couldn't speak. "I don't understand," he admitted. "Hablo español," she said, holding her thumb and forefinger close together. "Poco." "The man in this picture," Mitchell tried again, in halting Spanish. "Dónde está?" The girl studied him warily, then pointed east. "Hombres malos," she said. "Bad men." Mitchell understood immediately. Redgrave had found Holloway. "Estás sola?" he asked. "Are you alone?" The girl shook her head more emphatically. "Mi hermana." She pointed east again with growing distress. Mitchell pieced together what he could. Redgrave had captured Holloway and presumably this girl's sister. "¿Cómo te llamas?" he asked. "What's your name?" "Kiona," she replied softly. Before Mitchell could question her further, the distant sound of hoofbeats reached them. Kiona's eyes widened with fear. "Hombres," she whispered, shrinking back. Mitchell moved to the doorway, peering out cautiously. 5 riders approached from the north, not Redgrave's group, but men Mitchell didn't recognize. Their manner of dress and the rifles they carried suggested trouble. "Hide," Mitchell told Kiona, gesturing urgently toward the back of the ruins. The girl disappeared into the shadows as Mitchell positioned himself beside the doorway, rifle ready. The riders drew closer, dust billowing behind them like smoke. They reined in before the mission, scanning the area with practiced eyes. Their leader, a man with a scar bisecting his left cheek, dismounted. "I know you're in there, Holloway," he called. "Raymond Knox sent us. Come out now, and maybe we won't kill you right away." Mitchell remained silent, mind racing. Raymond Knox, the name was familiar. A wealthy landowner in the territory known for his harsh treatment of both workers and natives. The scarred man nodded to his companions, who spread out, surrounding the building. "We know about the girl, too. A valuable little thing, ain't she? Lot of people interested in what she knows." Mitchell glanced back toward where Kiona had hidden. What could a child possibly know that would interest men like these? The leader stepped closer to the doorway. "Last chance, Holloway, or we start shooting." Decision time. Mitchell could reveal himself, explain he wasn't Holloway, but then they'd search the ruins and find Kiona. Or he could fight against 5 men with unknown skills and intentions. The choice was made for him, when one of the riders spotted Shadow tethered nearby. "Boss, horseback here. Someone's definitely inside." The scarred man raised his rifle. "All right then, we do this the hard way." The first shot splintered the wooden doorframe inches from Mitchell's head. He responded instinctively, years of military training taking over. His first shot caught the leader in the shoulder, spinning him backward. His second dropped one of the flanking men from his saddle. The remaining three returned fire, bullets peppering the stone walls. Mitchell ducked back inside, moving to a window for a better angle. Two quick shots, and another man fell. The last two riders retreated to the cover of a low stone wall, calling to their wounded leader. "Whoever you are," one shouted, "you're dead. Knox doesn't forgive, and he doesn't forget." Mitchell didn't respond, conserving breath and focus. The standoff stretched for long minutes, the desert sun climbing higher, baking the stone around them. A soft touch on his arm nearly made Mitchell jump. Kiona had crept up beside him, silent as a shadow. "Mi hermana," she whispered urgently, pointing east again. "Ahora." Mitchell understood her concern. If these men were also searching for Holloway, and Redgrave already had him, time was running out for her sister. Suddenly, Kiona touched the stone talisman around her neck, closed her eyes, and began singing softly, a melodic chant that raised the hairs on Mitchell's arms. Outside, the desert wind picked up, swirling dust into spinning columns. The clouds that had been distant on the horizon rushed toward them, darkening the sky with unnatural speed. Within minutes, a sandstorm engulfed the ruins, reducing visibility to mere feet. The girl tugged at Mitchell's sleeve. "Vamos," she said. "Let's go." Mitchell hesitated only briefly, wondering at what he had just witnessed. Had the girl somehow summoned the storm? Impossible. Yet the timing. They slipped out the back of the ruins, Mitchell leading Shadow carefully through the blinding sand. The girl moved with surprising confidence, as though the storm affected her less. They had gone perhaps half a mile when the wind died as suddenly as it had risen, leaving them exposed on open ground. But Knox's men at the ruins were nowhere to be seen. Kiona looked up at Mitchell with those fathomless eyes and said simply, "Ayúdame. Help me." Mitchell nodded, understanding flowing between them without words. Whatever strange circumstances had brought them together, they now shared a purpose: find her sister, find Holloway, and discover what Raymond Knox wanted badly enough to send armed men into Apache territory. "I'll help you," he promised, lifting her onto his horse before mounting behind her. "Vamos a encontrar tu hermana." Let's find your sister. They rode east, following tracks partially obscured by the strange storm. Mitchell's thoughts tumbled like the sand that still clung to his clothing. What had he gotten himself into? A bounty hunt had somehow become something far more complicated, dragging him back into the world of Apache settler conflicts he'd tried for 10 years to escape. Yet, as the small figure sat straight-backed before him, facing the rising sun with quiet determination, Mitchell felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time: purpose. Not just the hollow satisfaction of bringing in another bounty, but something deeper, something that might perhaps begin to balance those scales at last. The tracks led them to a narrow canyon by midday. Mitchell reined in at the entrance, studying the sheer rock walls that rose on either side, a perfect place for an ambush. Beside him, Kiona had gone tense, her small hands gripping the saddle horn. "¿Qué pasa?" he asked softly. "What's wrong?" She pointed toward the canyon. "Mala tierra," she whispered. "Bad land." Mitchell scanned the area, seeing nothing obvious to fear. The canyon was silent, the only movement the occasional desert hawk circling overhead. Yet something felt off, an instinct honed through years of combat whispered warnings he couldn't quite decipher. "Hey, otro camino?" he asked, gesturing around the canyon. "Is there another way?" Kiona shook her head. "No, but..." She pointed into the canyon depths, her expression insistent. Her sister was in there or had passed this way. Mitchell dismounted, helping the girl down. "Stay behind me," he instructed, drawing his rifle. They would proceed on foot, leading Shadow. Better to move quietly and keep the horse calm if trouble arose. The canyon narrowed as they advanced, the walls closing in until they were walking single file through a passage barely wide enough for the horse. Shadow snorted nervously, ears flicking back and forth. Ahead, the passage opened into a wider area, some kind of enclosed canyon floor. As they reached the opening, Mitchell stopped abruptly. The sight before him froze the blood in his veins. Redgrave and his men were there, but not as Mitchell had expected to find them. They lay scattered across the dusty ground, bodies contorted in death. No obvious wounds marked them, no blood, no signs of struggle. They simply appeared to have dropped where they stood. Among them lay another figure, better dressed and carrying a satchel, now spilled open with books and papers scattered around him like fallen leaves. Frank Holloway, the bounty Mitchell had been pursuing, just as dead as the rest. Kiona peered around Mitchell, then made a small, distressed sound. She darted forward before he could stop her, rushing to the far side of the canyon where a slumped figure leaned against the rock wall, a young woman in traditional Apache dress, wrists bound with rope, head bowed. "Nahimana!" Kiona cried, the first English word Mitchell had heard her speak. The woman's head lifted slowly, revealing a face beautiful despite the dirt and bruises that marked it. Her eyes, unlike her sister's, burned with a fierce intelligence and unmistakable hatred as they locked on Mitchell. "Get away from her," she said in perfect English, struggling to stand despite her bonds. "You've done enough, white man." Mitchell approached her slowly, hands raised to show he meant no harm. "I'm not with them," he said, gesturing to the dead men. "I found your sister at the mission ruins. She asked for my help." The woman Nahimana looked from Mitchell to Kiona, who was now speaking rapidly in Apache, her small hands gesturing emphatically. "Untie me," Nahimana said finally, still wary but seemingly convinced by her sister's words. "Then we need to leave, now." Mitchell complied, using his knife to cut through the ropes binding her wrists. "What happened here?" he asked, eyeing the dead men. "The canyon happened," Nahimana said cryptically, rubbing her raw wrists. "The ancestors protect what's theirs." She stood shakily, accepting her sister's support. "We need to go. Others will come." "Others? You mean more of Knox's men?" Nahimana's gaze snapped to his. "How do you know that name?" "His men attacked us at the mission," Mitchell explained. "They were looking for Holloway and—" He hesitated. "Something a girl knows." Something flickered across Nahimana's face. Fear or recognition. Mitchell couldn't tell which. She exchanged rapid words with Kiona, who nodded solemnly. "Who are you?" Nahimana demanded, turning back to Mitchell. "Mitchell Calloway. I was tracking Holloway for the bounty." He gestured to the dead professor. "Seems that's not going to happen now." "No," Nahimana agreed, "but Raymond Knox will pay much more than your bounty to get what he wants." She straightened, seeming to reach a decision. "Help us get back to our people safely, and I'll tell you everything. Why Holloway came to us, what Knox is after, and why those men died without a mark on them." Mitchell glanced at the bodies again, a chill running down his spine despite the desert heat. "And if I refuse?" Nahimana's lips curved in a smile that held no warmth. "Then you'll never leave this canyon alive, Mitchell Calloway. The ancestors are still watching." As if to emphasize her words, a sudden wind whipped through the canyon, stirring dust devils around the dead men, the same unnatural wind that had appeared at the ruins. Mitchell wasn't a superstitious man, but twice in one day strained coincidence. "I'll help you," he said finally, "but I want answers." "When we're safe," she agreed, then turned to examine the scattered contents of Holloway's satchel. She collected several pages, folding them carefully before tucking them into her clothing. "Let's go. There's another way out to the north." As they prepared to leave, Mitchell knelt beside Holloway's body. The man's expression was peaceful, as though he'd simply lain down to rest. In his hand, he clutched a small leather-bound journal. Mitchell pried it free, leafing through pages filled with drawings, notes, and maps. "He was obsessed with finding it," Nahimana said, watching him. "The place where ancestors rest. He believed it held knowledge beyond price." "Did it?" Mitchell asked, pocketing the journal. Nahimana's expression remained unreadable. "It held something. Whether it was what he sought, that's a different question." They left the canyon by a narrow trail that wound up the northern wall, invisible unless you knew where to look. Mitchell led Shadow carefully while Nahimana supported her sister, who seemed to be weakening now that the immediate danger had passed. As they crested the canyon rim, Mitchell looked back at the bodies below, now mere specks on the dusty floor. He couldn't help but wonder if he was making the biggest mistake of his life, or perhaps taking the first step toward redemption he'd been seeking for 10 long years. Either way, there was no turning back now. The desert stretched before them, vast and unforgiving, hiding secrets both ancient and new beneath its scorching surface. And somewhere out there, Raymond Knox waited, hunting a treasure only Nahimana and her sister understood. Mitchell checked his ammunition, adjusted his hat against the glaring sun, and set his face toward the northern horizon. If answers lay in that direction, he would find them, or die trying. The ghost of Abacu walked with him still, but for the first time in years, Mitchell Calloway felt like he might be moving towards something rather than just running from his past. The sun had begun its descent toward the western horizon when Mitchell finally called for a halt. They had traveled for hours across unforgiving terrain, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the Valley of Shadows. Kiona had weakened considerably during the journey, her small face drawn with exhaustion. Even Nahimana, despite her fierce determination, was swaying slightly as they walked. "We'll rest here," Mitchell decided, gesturing toward a cluster of rock formations that would provide both shelter and a defensible position. "Make camp before dark." Nahimana nodded, too tired to argue. She helped her sister down from shadow with gentle hands, murmuring words of encouragement in Apache. Mitchell busied himself gathering what sparse vegetation he could find for a small fire, aware of Nahimana's eyes following his every move. The land around them was transitioning from desert to scrubland, with scattered junipers and pinyon pines dotting the landscape. A good sign they were moving into higher elevation, where water would be more plentiful. As darkness fell, the three sat around a carefully built fire, small enough to provide warmth without announcing their presence to anyone who might be searching the night. Mitchell offered them jerky and hardtack from his provisions, which they accepted without comment. "Time for answers," Mitchell said, finally breaking the silence. "What's Raymond Knox after? And why did those men die in that canyon?" Nahimana studied him across the flames, the firelight casting dancing shadows across her face. Her bruises looked worse in the dim light, evidence of rough handling by Redgrave and his men. Yet there was nothing broken in her spirit. Her eyes remained defiant, wary. "First, I want to know who you really are," she countered. "My sister says you helped her, but I know you're kind. Army man turned bounty hunter. Why should I trust you?" Mitchell considered the question. "You shouldn't," he said honestly, "but right now I'm all you've got." A hint of surprise crossed her face at his bluntness. "I was a captain in the Union Army," he continued. "Served under General Carleton during the Apache campaigns. After what happened at Sand Creek, I couldn't do it anymore." Mitchell's voice grew distant. "What I saw, what men I'd respected had done to women and children. I resigned my commission the next day. Been hunting bounties ever since. Exchanging one form of blood money for another," she observed coldly. Mitchell didn't deny it. "The men I hunt deserve what's coming to them." "And did we?" Nahimana challenged, gesturing to herself and her sleeping sister. "Did the Apache deserve what came to them?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy as a thundercloud. Mitchell had asked himself the same thing countless times over the years. "No," he said finally, "you didn't." Something shifted in Nahimana's gaze, not trust exactly, but perhaps a willingness to listen. "Raymond Knox wants what all white men want in our lands," she said after a long pause. "Gold, silver, copper. But what he seeks is more valuable than any of those." "The place where ancestors rest," Mitchell said, remembering Holloway's journal. "What is it?" Nahimana reached into her clothing and withdrew the folded papers she had taken from Holloway's satchel. She held them up but didn't offer them to Mitchell. "These are maps, incomplete ones. For generations, my people have guarded a sacred place, a series of caves hidden deep in the mountains. The Spanish called it La Boca de Espiritu, the spirit's mouth. It contains not only the remains of our great leaders, but also our knowledge, our history." "Holloway was searching for it?" Nahimana nodded. "At first, he came to us as a friend, interested in our ways, our language. He gained the trust of some of our elders." Her expression darkened. "Then Knox's men arrived at our camp, demanding to know the location of the caves. When the elders refused, she faltered for the first time. They killed them," Mitchell finished for her. "All but one. Grey Wolf escaped with some of our people, including Kiona and me. We fled into the mountains, but Holloway tracked us, begging forgiveness, claiming he never intended for violence." She laughed bitterly, as if his intentions mattered. Why did he care so much about finding these caves? Holloway believed the caves contained ancient knowledge, star maps, medical wisdom, mining techniques, things your universities would pay fortunes to possess. Nahimana's fingers tightened around the papers. But he didn't understand what he was looking for. The caves hold something far more valuable than gold or knowledge. What? Mitchell pressed. Nahimana hesitated, then said simply, power. A coyote howled somewhere in the darkness beyond their fire, the sound echoing across the empty land. Kiona stirred in her sleep, murmuring something before settling again. What kind of power? Mitchell asked, thinking of the strange storm at the ruins, the men dead without a mark. The kind your people have always feared and coveted, Nahimana replied. The reason you called our medicine men devils, our ceremonies witchcraft, the connection between our people and the earth itself. Mitchell remained skeptical. And Knox believes this? Knox doesn't care about beliefs. He cares about results. He's seen enough to know there's something worth finding. She nodded toward Kiona. My sister is Kanalhe, born with the gift of harmony. She can speak to the winds, the rain, the earth itself. That's why Knox wants her, Mitchell concluded, to find the comb. Yes, and once he does, Nahimana's voice hardened, he'll destroy everything, the knowledge, the history, the power, all to ensure no Apache ever threatens his control of these lands again. Mitchell leaned back, absorbing this information. Part of him, the rational military part, dismissed it as superstition. Yet he had seen strange things today that defied explanation. Those men in the canyon, he said, how did they die? Nahimana's eyes reflected the firelight like polished obsidian. The canyon is protected by ancient spirits. They recognize those who enter with violence in their hearts. She shrugged. Holloway knew the risks. He entered anyway, believing his knowledge would protect him. It didn't. Mitchell studied her, trying to determine how much of what she said was belief and how much was truth. It didn't matter, he decided. Whether the danger came from supernatural forces or angry Apache warriors, the threat to these women was real. Where is Grey Wolf taking your people? He asked. North to the high country. There's a valley there where our people have gathered in times of danger for generations. It's where we were headed when Redgrave caught us. Nahimana's expression softened as she looked at her sleeping sister. Kiona ran while they took me. She was supposed to find Grey Wolf, not a white bounty hunter. Lucky for both of you that she did, Mitchell pointed out. Nahimana didn't argue. Instead, she asked, will you help us reach our people? Mitchell considered the question. His original mission, capturing Holloway, was finished. He could return to Santa Fe, report the man's death, perhaps even collect a partial reward. But something held him back. These women needed protection, and more importantly, whatever Knox was planning needed to be stopped. I'll help you, he said finally, but there's something you should know. He pulled Holloway's journal from his pocket. I took this from his body. If it contains information about the caves, give it to me, Nahimana demanded, suddenly alert. Mitchell held the journal out of reach. Not yet. This may be the only leverage we have if Knox catches up to us. It's not yours to keep, her voice rose. Those secrets belong to my people. And I'll make sure they get back to your people, Mitchell promised. But for now, it stays with me. Their eyes locked in silent battle, neither willing to yield. Finally, Nahimana looked away. If you betray us, she said softly, the canyon death will seem merciful compared to what I'll bring upon you. Mitchell believed her. They set out at first light, traveling north through increasingly rugged terrain. Kiona seemed stronger after a night's rest, though she remained quieter than before. Occasionally, she would stop to touch a plant or rock, whispering words Mitchell couldn't understand, as if communicating with the land itself. How far to this valley? He asked over his shoulder. 2 days if we're not delayed, Nahimana replied, but we'll need to be careful. We must cross open country before reaching the mountains. The morning passed uneventfully as they followed game trails through scrubland that gradually gave way to scattered pines and small meadows. Water became more plentiful, allowing them to refill canteens from clear streams. Around midday, they crested a ridge that offered a panoramic view of the territory spread before them. In the far distance, a smudge of smoke rose against the sky. What's that? Mitchell asked, pointing. Nahimana squinted. A settlement, perhaps, or a ranch. Mitchell shook his head. Too much smoke for a settlement. A cold feeling settled in his stomach. That's a signal fire. Knox's men possibly, or Apache. He studied the horizon. Either way, we should avoid it. They altered course, moving northeast rather than due north. The day grew warmer as the sun climbed higher, and they took shelter in a grove of pines during the hottest hours. As they rested, Mitchell found himself studying Holloway's journal more carefully. The man had been meticulous in his notes, detailed drawings of landmarks, transcriptions of Apache words with attempted translations, and maps marked with cryptic symbols. One passage caught his attention. The entrance lies not where expected. The mountains guard their secrets well, presenting false doors to mislead the unworthy. Only those who understand the language of stone can find the true path. Mitchell looked up to find Nahimana watching him. What does it mean, the language of stone? She hesitated, then said, the caves are hidden within a maze of canyons. Many tunnels lead nowhere to deadly drops. Only those who can read the ancient signs know which path to take. And Kiona can interpret these markings? Her connection runs deeper than mere interpretation. Nahimana watched her sister with a mixture of reverence and concern. The earth speaks to her in whispers only she can hear. The wind carries messages meant for her alone. Stones reveal their memories beneath her touch. Mitchell observed the girl by the stream, eyes closed, fingers trailing through the water as ripples formed patterns too deliberate to be random. Was this ability present from childhood? He asked carefully. She drew rain during drought when she was barely walking, Nahimana replied quietly. Our mother carried the gift too, though it manifested differently. She could feel illness in plants and animals, sense water beneath the ground. A shadow crossed her face. Before the soldiers came, Kiona would have been apprenticed to our medicine women by now. Instead, she learns by instinct alone, guided only by dreams and what little I remember of our mother's teachings. The vulnerability in her voice struck Mitchell unexpectedly. You're trying to protect her from more than just Knox, aren't you? Nahimana met his gaze steadily. Our ways are dying, Mitchell Calloway. Our people scattered or confined to reservations. The place where ancestors rest may be the last repository of who we truly are. She gestured to Kiona, and she may be the last of her kind. The weight of her words settled over him like a heavy blanket. He had seen it happening during his army years, the systematic destruction of native cultures, languages, beliefs. At the time, he'd accepted it as inevitable, even necessary for progress. Now, watching this young girl commune with forces he couldn't understand, he felt the magnitude of what was being lost. We should move on, he said finally, uncomfortable with the direction of his thoughts. Cover more ground before dark. They continued their journey through the afternoon, the terrain becoming increasingly difficult for Shadow to navigate. By evening, they had reached the foothills of the mountains Nahimana had described, jagged peaks that cut into the sky like stone teeth. Mitchell found a sheltered spot between two large boulders to make camp, positioned so they could see anyone approaching from the open country behind them. As he gathered wood for a fire, he noticed Kiona tracing symbols in the dirt with a stick, her expression intent with concentration. What is she doing? He asked Nahimana. Leaving a message for Grey Wolf, she explained, telling him we're coming, but not alone. Mitchell frowned. Is that wise? If Knox's men find these markings, they won't understand them, Nahimana assured him, and they'll be gone by morning. Sure enough, when Mitchell checked the ground the next morning, the symbols had vanished as if they'd never been there. He told himself it was just wind and dew, but doubt gnawed at the edges of his rational mind. They set off into the mountains, following trails so faint that Mitchell would have missed them entirely without Nahimana's guidance. Shadow struggled on the steeper inclines, forcing them to dismount and lead him carefully over rocky terrain. By midday, they had climbed high enough to look back over the way they had come. The land stretched away below them, rippling with hills and valleys, the distant desert shimmering in the heat. There, Mitchell said suddenly, pointing southwest. Riders, Nahimana confirmed grimly. Moving fast. 5 riders moved across the land below, following their trail with unmistakable purpose. Knox's men, she confirmed grimly. They're tracking us. Mitchell judged the distance. They're half a day behind at least. If we keep moving, we can stay ahead. They pushed on, climbing higher into the mountains. The air grew cooler, the pine forest thicker. Game was plentiful here. Deer bounded away at their approach, and once they spotted a black bear fishing in a stream. Late in the afternoon, as they navigated a particularly treacherous slope, Shadow lost his footing. The horse whinnied in panic as stones clattered down the mountainside. Mitchell lunged for the reins, but too late. Shadow slid backward, taking their supplies with him. Nahimana pulled Kiona clear as the horse tumbled down the slope, coming to rest 20 feet below, legs thrashing in pain and fear. Mitchell scrambled down to his faithful mount, heart sinking as he saw the unnatural angle of Shadow's front leg. A clean break, impossible to splint in these conditions. Kiona knelt beside the suffering animal, stroking his neck and singing softly. The horse gradually calmed under her touch, his panicked eyes growing peaceful. "I'm sorry, old friend," Mitchell murmured, drawing his revolver. He met Nahimana's gaze over the horse's body. "Take your sister up the trail." She nodded, leading Kiona away. When they were out of sight, Mitchell pressed his forehead briefly against Shadow's neck, then put the animal out of its misery with a single shot. The sound echoed through the mountains like a thunderclap. Mitchell salvaged what supplies he could, then rejoined the women. Nahimana said nothing about Shadow, but her eyes held a new respect for the way Mitchell had handled the situation. "We need to move faster now," she said instead. "That shot will carry for miles." They continued their ascent, now burdened with the supplies they had to carry themselves. The mountains seemed to close in around them, the trail narrowing until they were moving single file along ledges barely wide enough for their feet. As dusk approached, Kiona suddenly stopped, head tilted as if listening. "What is it?" Nahimana asked in Apache. The girl pointed ahead excitedly, breaking into a run despite her exhaustion. "Kiona!" Nahimana called, hurrying after her. Mitchell followed, one hand on his rifle. They rounded a bend in the trail and found themselves facing a sheer cliff wall split by a narrow crevice. Kiona stood before it, hands raised as if in greeting. From within the crevice, a figure emerged, tall and straight-backed despite his advanced years, with a face weathered by time and hardship. A Winchester rifle rested easily in his hands, aimed squarely at Mitchell's chest. "Gray Wolf!" Kiona cried, running to the old man. Gray Wolf embraced the girl with one arm, keeping his rifle trained on Mitchell. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, assessed the white man with cold calculation. Nahimana stepped forward, speaking rapidly in Apache. Mitchell caught the tension in her voice, the urgency of her explanation. Finally, the old warrior lowered his rifle slightly. "You bring a white man to our sanctuary," he said to Nahimana in heavily accented English, "after what they did to our people." "He saved us," Nahimana replied, "and he knows about Knox's plans." Gray Wolf's eyes narrowed. "The man who hunts our children." "The same." The old Apache studied Mitchell for a long moment, then gestured toward the crevice. "Come before darkness falls." They followed him through the narrow opening, which widened into a hidden path winding upward through the cliff face. After several hundred yards, the path opened onto a small plateau nestled between towering peaks, a natural fortress invisible from below. A dozen simple shelters stood in a semicircle around a central fire pit. Women stirred cooking pots, while children played quietly nearby. Men stood guard at strategic points around the perimeter. All activity ceased as they entered the camp, every eye turning to the stranger in their midst. Gray Wolf spoke loudly in Apache, explaining Mitchell's presence. Murmurs rippled through the gathered people, some angry, others merely curious. One man stepped forward, younger than Gray Wolf, but with the same proud bearing. He wore a mixture of traditional Apache clothing and items clearly taken from white settlers. A calico shirt, cavalry boots. A revolver hung at his hip. "This is Stone Bear," Nahimana explained quietly to Mitchell. "Gray Wolf's son." Stone Bear approached them, his expression hostile. "You bring an army man here," he demanded of Nahimana. "Have you forgotten what they did to your family? To all our families?" "I haven't forgotten," she replied evenly. "But he's not army anymore, and he knows about the caves." Stone Bear's hand moved to his revolver. "Then perhaps he should not leave this place alive." Mitchell remained still, aware that any sudden movement might be his last. These people had every reason to hate him and what he represented. "Enough," Gray Wolf commanded. "The council will decide what to do with him." He turned to Mitchell. "Until then, you will be watched. If you try to leave or signal to others, you will die. Mitchell nodded his understanding. He was led to a small shelter at the edge of the camp, where two armed men took up positions outside. Nahimana and Kiona disappeared with Grey Wolf toward the central fire. Left alone, Mitchell took stock of his situation. He had walked willingly into an Apache stronghold, carrying knowledge that could either save these people or destroy them. The journal in his pocket felt suddenly heavy with responsibility. Outside, he heard the camp settling for the night. Voices murmuring in a language he didn't understand. Children hushed, guards changed position. Normal life continuing, despite extraordinary circumstances. He thought of the riders following their trail. If Knox's men found this place, there would be a massacre. These few survivors, perhaps the last free Apache in this part of the territory, would be wiped out. A soft footfall outside his shelter drew his attention. Stone Bear entered, his hand still resting on his revolver. Behind him came Nahimana, her face set in determined lines. "The council has questions," Stone Bear announced without preamble. "You will answer truthfully, or I will put a bullet in your heart." Mitchell nodded. "I understand." "First," Nahimana said, "show us the journal." Mitchell hesitated only briefly before retrieving Holloway's journal from his pocket. He handed it to her, watching as she and Stone Bear examined the pages with growing concern. "He knew more than we thought," Nahimana murmured, pointing to a particular drawing. Stone Bear's expression darkened. "If Knox has similar information—" "He doesn't," Mitchell interjected. "Not yet, anyway. That's why he needs your sister." Both Apache turned to him, their faces showing surprise that he had followed their exchange. "Holloway was working with Knox," Mitchell continued, "but he was keeping secrets too. I think he wanted the caves for himself." "To what end?" Nahimana demanded. Mitchell thought of the passages he'd read in the journal. Fame, recognition. He believed these caves contained knowledge that would rewrite history, prove that the Apache and other tribes had advanced understanding of astronomy, medicine, perhaps even metallurgy long before European contact. "And this matters to white men?" Stone Bear asked skeptically. "To some, not to Knox. He just wants the land and whatever resources he can extract from it." Nahimana closed his journal, her decision made. "We need to reach the caves before Knox does. Seal them if necessary." "The elders would never allow it," Stone Bear protested. "The elders are dead," she replied harshly, "except for your father, and he agrees with me." Stone Bear fell silent, internal conflict evident on his face. Finally, he turned back to Mitchell. "Why would you help us? What do you gain?" It was the question Mitchell had been asking himself since he first decided to help Kiona at the mission ruins. What did he hope to gain? Not money, not fame, perhaps not even redemption. "I'm tired," he said finally. "Tired of watching your people driven from their lands. Tired of children dying, their way of life destroyed. I was part of that once. I don't want to be anymore." Stone Bear studied him, searching for deception. "Pretty words, but I have heard white men speak prettily before while their hands took everything we had." "I can't change what others have done," Mitchell said. "I can only choose what I do now." Before Stone Bear could respond, shouts erupted outside the shelter. A young Apache warrior burst in, speaking rapidly. Stone Bear's expression turned grim. "What is it?" Mitchell asked. "Scouts have spotted riders approaching from the south," Nahimana translated. "At least a dozen men, heavily armed." "Knox," Mitchell said with certainty. "They must have picked up our trail faster than I thought." "Or they had help," Stone Bear suggested darkly, his suspicious gaze falling on Mitchell. "If I'd wanted to lead them here, I wouldn't have killed my horse to avoid leaving tracks," Mitchell pointed out. Another exchange in Apache followed, too fast for Mitchell to catch. Finally, Nahimana turned to him. "We're leaving," she announced. "Now. Grey Wolf will lead the others north to safety." Her eyes held a challenge. "We are going to the caves. Are you coming with us?" Mitchell understood the choice before him. He could stay with the main group, help defend them if necessary, then find his own way back to civilization. Or he could venture deeper into Apache territory to where caves that might not even exist lay, pursued by men who would kill him without hesitation. "I'll come," he said, rising to his feet. Stone Bear's lip curled in what might have been derision or reluctant respect. Then we move now under cover of darkness. If we are lucky, Knox will follow the larger group. And if we're not lucky? Mitchell asked. Nahimana's eyes gleamed in the dim light. Then they follow us, straight to the place where ancestors rest. A smile touched her lips, cold and fierce. And they learn why it bears that name. They moved like ghosts through the mountain darkness, three figures threading their way along ridge lines and narrow passes that would have been perilous even in daylight. Stone Bear led the way, his knowledge of the terrain evident in every confident step. Nahimana followed, occasionally supporting herself against rock walls when the path grew treacherous. Mitchell brought up the rear, alert for any sound of pursuit. The moon had risen, 3/4 full, casting enough light to navigate by, but also enough to make them visible if anyone was watching the heights. Clouds scudded across the night sky, occasionally plunging them into complete darkness before releasing them again to the moon's silver glow. After several hours of silent travel, Stone Bear raised a hand, bringing them to a halt at the edge of a drop-off. Below stretched a valley, narrow and deep, with a silver ribbon of water cutting through its center. On the far side rose another mountain face, even steeper than the one they had descended. "We rest here until dawn," Stone Bear announced, his voice barely above a whisper. Crossing the valley in darkness would be suicide. They found shelter beneath an overhanging rock, huddling together for warmth in the mountain chill. No fire tonight. The risk of detection was too great. Mitchell positioned himself at the edge of their shelter, watching the valley below for any sign of movement. His body ached from the punishing pace Stone Bear had set, but his mind remained sharp, processing all he had learned. "How far to the caves?" he asked quietly. "A day's journey," Nahimana replied, "beyond the next mountain." "And Kiona, safe with Grey Wolf and the others heading north?" Nahimana's voice softened when speaking of her sister. "She will guide them to another sanctuary while we deal with Knox." Mitchell glanced at her. "You're protective of her." "She's all I have left." The simple statement carried the weight of mountains. Stone Bear, who had been keeping watch at the other end of their shelter, spoke without turning. "Tell him about your parents, Nahimana. Tell him what his people did. Tell him how you recognized him." Nahimana shot Stone Bear a sharp look, but the young warrior had already returned his attention to the darkness beyond. After a moment, she sighed. "My father was a medicine man," she said, her voice low. "He taught me the old ways. The healing knowledge passed through my mother's bloodline. Before I was 15, I could draw poison from wounds, set broken bones, and speak to the waters that heal." She traced the medallion at her throat. "During the early days of the war, a Union patrol was attacked near our winter camp. One soldier was left behind, shot through the shoulder, burning with fever." She looked directly at Mitchell now. "My father said to let him die, but I could not. I brought him to a hidden place, cleaned his wound with sacred water, and sang the healing songs for 3 days. When his fever broke, he gave me this." She touched the edge of her own medallion, identical to the one Mitchell wore. "A Thunderbird medallion, a matched pair. He kept one, gave me the other, said it was the symbol of his unit, said if we met again, he would know me by it." Her voice hardened. "2 years later, he led soldiers to our village. He did not recognize me, or pretended not to." Mitchell's face had gone pale. "I remember," he whispered. "You were different then, younger. But your eyes—" He reached for his own medallion. "I never knew your name." "My father was right about white men's promises," she continued. "He refused to lead our people to the reservation at San Carlos. Said it was a place of death for Apache." She paused. "He was right. Disease, starvation, soldiers who took pleasure in punishment." Her fingers absently traced patterns in the dust beside her. "When the army came to our village, he stood before them unarmed, asking only that they let us remain on our ancestral lands." She fell silent for so long that Mitchell thought she might not continue. When she did, her voice had hardened. "They shot him where he stood, made an example of him. My mother tried to shield Kiona and me with her body. They killed her too." Her eyes found Mitchell in the darkness. "I was 15. Kiona was 5. Mitchell felt a familiar weight of shame settle on his shoulders. "I'm sorry," he said, knowing the inadequacy of the words even as he spoke them. "Your sorrow changes nothing," Stone Bear interjected from his position. Your kind have been sorry while taking everything from us. Some of us are trying to do better, Mitchell replied, meeting the young man's hostile gaze. When it's already too late. Stone Bear turned away again, ending the conversation. The night deepened around them, the cold growing more intense. Mitchell offered Nahimana his coat, which she refused with a shake of her head. We Apache are not so fragile, she said, though she huddled deeper into her own clothing. Save your strength for tomorrow. Mitchell nodded, respecting her pride. How did you survive? He asked after a while. After your parents? Grey Wolf found us, she answered. He had been a friend of my father's. He took us in, taught us to survive in the new world your people created. Her voice took on a hint of grudging respect. He believes adaptation is our only hope, learning your ways while keeping our own alive in our hearts. And Stone Bear disagrees. A small smile touched her lips. Stone Bear believes the only good white man is a dead one. Can't say I blame him, Mitchell admitted. And yet here you are risking your life to help us. Nahimana studied him curiously. Why? It was the same question Stone Bear had asked earlier, but coming from Nahimana, it felt different. Genuine curiosity rather than accusation. I've done things I'm not proud of, Mitchell said finally. Things that wake me in the night, make me reach for a bottle to quiet the memories. He met her gaze. I can't bring back those who've died. Can't change what happened at Sand Creek or 100 other places. But maybe I can stop it from happening again here and now. Nahimana considered his words. Redemption. I don't know if there is such a thing for men like me, he replied honestly, but I have to try anyway. Something shifted in her expression, not forgiveness, but perhaps understanding. Before she could respond, Stone Bear moved suddenly from his position, body tense with alertness. Movement, he whispered, in the valley. Mitchell joined him at the edge of their shelter, eyes straining to pierce the darkness below. For a moment he saw nothing. Then a flicker of movement, the moonlight catching on something metallic. Riders, he confirmed. At least 6, maybe more. Knox's men, Nahimana said, coming up beside them. They must have followed our trail instead of Grey Wolf's group. Stone Bear cursed softly in Apache. How did they track us through the mountains in darkness? A cold realization settled over Mitchell. They have an Apache scout, someone who knows these trails as well as you do. Impossible, Stone Bear insisted. No Apache would help Knox. Unless they had no choice, Nahimana suggested quietly, or unless they believed the reward was worth the betrayal. Stone Bear's expression hardened. If I find such a traitor, they will beg for death before I'm finished. Mitchell studied the riders' progress. They had reached the stream at the valley center and were allowing their horses to drink. From this distance, he couldn't make out individual features, but one thing was clear. They were heavily armed, rifles gleaming in the moonlight. They'll make camp soon, he observed. Too dangerous to cross the valley in darkness, even with a guide. Then we have until dawn, Nahimana said. We should move now, get as far ahead as possible. No, Mitchell countered. We rest, regain our strength, leave an hour before first light. I don't take orders from you, white man, Stone Bear bristled. It's not an order, it's strategy. Mitchell kept his voice calm. If we push on now, we'll be exhausted when we need our strength most. Better to be rested and an hour ahead than stumbling and 2 hours ahead. The Apache warrior glared at him, clearly wanting to reject any suggestion from a white man on principle. But after a moment, he grudgingly nodded. Dawn then, but not a minute later. They settled into an uneasy rest, taking turns keeping watch. Mitchell found sleep elusive, his mind racing with plans and contingencies. The caves lay a day's journey away, across terrain he didn't know, pursued by men who wanted him dead. And even if they reached their destination first, what then? How could 3 people, no matter how determined, stop Knox and his mercenaries? When his turn at watch came, Mitchell studied Holloway's journal again by moonlight. The professor's notes became increasingly erratic toward the end, filled with excitement and paranoia in equal measure. One passage stood out. The entrance is marked by the Weeping Woman, a rock formation visible only when the sun strikes it at midday. Beyond lies the Guardian's Path, a series of tunnels where many have died, their bones testimony to the cave's protection. The Apache speak of voices in the darkness, spirits that confuse and mislead those whose hearts are impure. Superstitions, surely, yet I cannot shake the feeling of being watched whenever I approach. Mitchell closed the journal, troubled. Holloway had been a man of science, yet something about the caves had affected him deeply. Was there truth to Nahimana's claims about the power these caves contained? As the eastern sky began to lighten, Mitchell woke his companions. They ate a sparse breakfast of jerky and dried fruit, then prepared to move out. "We'll cross the valley quickly," Stone Bear instructed. "Stay low. Use whatever cover you can find. Once we reach the other side, there's a hidden path up the mountain face." Mitchell nodded, checking his rifle and revolver one last time. "And if we're spotted?" he asked. Stone Bear's expression was grim. "Then we fight, or we die." The descent into the valley was treacherous, loose scree threatening to send them sliding down the steep slope with every step. They moved diagonally, using what few sturdy plants and rocks they could find for handholds. By the time they reached the valley floor, the sky had lightened to a pale gray, though the sun had yet to crest the eastern peaks. The stream provided welcome relief after their descent. They refilled canteens quickly, then started across the open ground toward the far mountain. Mitchell felt exposed, constantly scanning the valley in both directions for signs of movement. They were halfway across when Nahimana suddenly froze. "Listen," she whispered. Mitchell strained his ears, but heard nothing unusual, just the gurgle of the stream and the faint rustle of wind through scrub brush. "Horses," Stone Bear said, his sharper hearing picking up what Mitchell could not. "Moving fast, upstream." "Run," Mitchell urged, abandoning caution toward the mountain. They sprinted across the remaining open ground, painfully visible against the valley floor. As they reached the first rocky outcroppings at the base of the far mountain, a shout echoed behind them. "There, 3 of them!" A rifle shot cracked the morning silence, the bullet throwing up dirt near Mitchell's feet. More shots followed as they scrambled for cover. "The path!" Stone Bear shouted, gesturing toward a nearly invisible crevice in the rock face. "Go!" Nahimana went first, slipping into the narrow opening. Mitchell followed, then Stone Bear, bullets pinging off the rocks around them. The crevice widened into a steep, winding trail that zigzagged up the mountain face, hidden from below by strategic outcroppings. They climbed frantically, driven by the sounds of pursuit. Mitchell's breath came in ragged gasps, his legs burning with the effort. Above them, the mountain seemed to stretch endlessly toward the sky. "Keep moving," Stone Bear urged from behind him. "They'll have to abandon their horses to follow us here." Mitchell glanced back and saw Stone Bear's face contorted in pain. Blood darkened the Apache's left sleeve. "You're hit," he said. "It's nothing," Stone Bear insisted, though his complexion had paled beneath his copper skin. "Keep climbing." They pushed on, higher and higher up the narrow trail. The sounds of pursuit grew more distant as Knox's men were forced to dismount and follow on foot. By mid-morning, they had reached a ledge wide enough to stop and rest. Nahimana immediately went to examine Stone Bear's wound. "The bullet passed through," she reported, tearing strips from her own clothing to bind the injury. "But you're losing blood." "I'll live," Stone Bear said through grated teeth. Mitchell kept watch while Nahimana treated her companion. The trail behind them remained clear for the moment, but he could see figures moving in the valley below, Knox's men spreading out to search for the hidden path. "They'll find it eventually," he said. "We need to keep moving." "There's another way," Nahimana said, finishing Stone Bear's bandage. "A tunnel through the mountain itself. It comes out closer to the caves." "You didn't mention this before," Mitchell noted. "Because it's dangerous," Stone Bear interjected. "The tunnel is unstable in places. It could collapse." "Still better than being shot," Mitchell pointed out. Nahimana nodded in agreement. "The entrance is not far from here." They continued along the ledge, which gradually widened into a true trail again. Stone Bear moved more slowly now, his injury clearly paining him despite his stoic expression. After half an hour, they reached a rockfall that appeared to block their path completely. "Here," Nahimana said, moving to a section of the fall that looked no different from any other to Mitchell's eyes. She began shifting smaller rocks aside, revealing a dark opening barely large enough for a person to crawl through. "You go first," she told Mitchell. "I'll help Stone Bear." Mitchell hesitated, then nodded. He removed his pack and pushed it through the opening before following on hands and knees. The tunnel beyond was pitch black and smelled of damp earth and stone. He pulled a match from his pocket, struck it against the rock wall, and held it up to survey their path. The tunnel extended before him, rough-hewn with a low ceiling but passable. Ancient support timbers, weathered almost to dust, lined the walls at irregular intervals. An old mining tunnel? He asked as Nahimana helped Stone Bear through the opening. Older than that, she replied. My people dug this path generations ago, during wars with the Navajo. Stone Bear managed to stand, though he leaned heavily against the wall. We need to block the entrance, he said. Slow them down if they find it. Mitchell nodded, moving back to the opening. Together, he and Nahimana shifted rocks to cover the entrance again, leaving no trace of their passage. As the last stone fell into place, darkness enveloped them completely. I have this, Nahimana said. Rustling sounds followed, then a soft glow illuminated her face as she lit a small torch made from pitch-soaked wood. Always prepared, Mitchell commented, impressed. Apache women learn to anticipate needs, she replied simply. Let's move. The torch cast eerie shadows as they made their way deeper into the mountain. The tunnel occasionally branched, but Nahimana navigated the maze with confidence, never hesitating at intersections. Stone Bear followed, one hand pressed to his wounded arm, his face growing increasingly drawn as they progressed. Mitchell brought up the rear, acutely aware of the tons of rock pressing down above them. He had never cared for enclosed spaces in this tunnel, with its low ceiling forcing him to stoop and its walls sometimes narrowing until they brushed his shoulders, tested his composure. How far does this go, he asked, as much to hear a human voice in the oppressive darkness as to gain information. It comes out near Eagle Peak, Nahimana answered. Perhaps 4 hours' journey if we move steadily. And the caves? Beyond Eagle Peak lies the Valley of Shadows. The caves are there. They walked in silence after that, conserving energy. The air grew thinner as they progressed deeper into the mountain, making breathing more labored. Twice they had to navigate sections where the ceiling had partially collapsed, forcing them to crawl on their bellies through narrow gaps. During one such passage, Stone Bear's strength finally failed him. He slumped forward, face pressed against the cool stone. I need rest, he gasped. Nahimana looked back in alarm. Not here, the tunnel widens ahead. With Mitchell's help, they managed to get Stone Bear through the narrow section to a small chamber beyond. The wounded Apache collapsed against a wall, his breathing shallow. He's burning with fever, Nahimana said, touching his forehead. The wound must be infected. Mitchell examined Stone Bear's arm. The bandage was soaked through with blood, and the skin around it had taken on an angry red hue with dark streaks extending toward his shoulder. He needs medicine, real medicine. The water speaks to me, Nahimana said quietly, but not as strongly as to Kiona with her winds. My healing gift needs the sacred waters to work fully. She touched her medallion. My father taught me to find water even in desert places, to hear its voice and know its healing properties. She removed her canteen, studying it with a frown. This water is silent, dead. It can cleanse, but not heal. She rummaged in her small pack, producing a pouch of dried herbs. These will help slow the fever, but the poison in his blood runs deep. Without living water, she didn't need to finish the thought. They both knew that without proper treatment, Stone Bear's condition would only worsen. That's why we must reach the sacred pool, she added softly. There, where the ancestors' power flows into the water, even death can sometimes be turned away. I can go on alone, Mitchell suggested. Get to the caves, do what needs to be done. Stone Bear's eyes flashed with sudden anger. No, he growled. Never trust a white man with our sacred places. You don't have much choice, Mitchell pointed out. You can barely stand. I would rather die than— Enough, Nahimana interrupted. Neither of you is going alone. She crushed the herbs between her fingers, then moistened them with water from her canteen to form a paste. This will buy us time. We'll rest here, then continue together. She applied the paste to Stone Bear's wound, murmuring words in Apache that sounded like a prayer or incantation. Stone Bear gradually relaxed, his eyes closing as whatever was in the herbs took effect. Mitchell settled against the opposite wall, stretching his legs in the cramped space. Will he make it? He asked quietly. Nahimana looked up, her face ghostly in the torch's flickering light. He is strong and stubborn. Runs in the family, Mitchell observed, earning a fleeting smile from her. Grey Wolf raised him to be a warrior in the old way, she said. But the old ways are dying no matter how tightly we hold on to them. She glanced at the sleeping stone bear. He refuses to accept that. And you? Mitchell asked. Nahimana was silent for a long moment. I accept that change comes whether we wish it or not. But I believe some things must be preserved, protected. Her eyes met his. That's why the caves matter. They hold not just our past, but the essence of who we are. What will you do if we reach them before Knox? Seal them up? If necessary, she nodded. Better they remain hidden forever than fall into hands that would profane them. Mitchell thought about what such a decision would mean. Centuries of knowledge and history lost to the world. Yet he couldn't argue with her reasoning. He'd seen firsthand what happened when white civilization encountered native cultures. The destruction, the exploitation, the loss. And what about you? Nahimana asked suddenly. If we succeed, what then? Back to bounty hunting? The question caught Mitchell off guard. He hadn't thought beyond their immediate goal of reaching the caves before Knox. The future, his future, was a hazy concept at best. I don't know, he admitted. Maybe it's time to stop running from what I was. Find something better to be. Like what? He shrugged. Never been much good at anything except tracking and shooting. Not exactly peaceful skills. Skills can serve different purposes, she observed. A knife can kill or heal, depending on who holds it. Before Mitchell could respond, a distant sound reached them, faint but unmistakable. Voices echoing through the tunnel. They found the entrance, he said, coming to his feet. We need to move. Nahimana quickly gathered her things and roused Stonebear. The Apache warrior came awake with a grimace of pain, but he managed to stand. Whatever herbs Nahimana had used had granted him a temporary renewal of strength. How far behind are they? He asked, his voice tight with pain. Can't tell, Mitchell replied, listening intently. The tunnel distorts sound. Could be an hour, could be less. Then we move faster, Stonebear said grimly. They continued their journey through the mountain's heart, now driven by the knowledge of pursuit. The tunnel began to slope upward, growing steeper until they were practically climbing rather than walking. Stonebear struggled visibly but refused any offer of assistance from Mitchell. After what felt like hours, a change in the air current suggested they were nearing an exit. The stale, confined atmosphere gave way to fresher breezes, carrying the scent of pine and open spaces. Almost there, Nahimana encouraged, supporting Stonebear as he stumbled. The tunnel ended abruptly at a vertical shaft with crude handholds carved into the rock. Daylight filtered down from above, a welcome sight after their long journey through darkness. I'll go first, Mitchell offered. Make sure it's clear. Neither Apache objected this time. Mitchell climbed carefully, testing each handhold before trusting his weight to it. 20 feet up, he reached the surface, emerging into a stand of dense pines. The sun was already past its zenith. They had spent more time in the tunnel than he'd realize. After ensuring no immediate threats lurked nearby, Mitchell signaled for the others to follow. Nahimana came next, then helped Stonebear, who emerged pale and sweating from the exertion. There, Nahimana said, pointing to a jagged peak rising above the tree line to the north. Eagle Peak. Beyond it lies the Valley of Shadows. Mitchell studied their surroundings, orienting himself. They stood on a forested slope, the mountain they had tunneled through looming behind them. Ahead, the land descended into a pine-filled valley before rising again toward Eagle Peak. The terrain was rough but passable. The Valley of Shadows, how far? Mitchell asked, gauging the rugged terrain ahead. Half a day's journey for a healthy traveler, Nahimana replied, her concerned gaze falling on Stonebear as the warrior leaned heavily against a pine trunk, breath coming in labored gasps. We continue, Stonebear insisted through clenched teeth, straightening with visible effort. Every moment we delay, Knox's men gain ground. And if you collapse from fever before we reach the valley, Mitchell challenged, I'd have to carry you, slowing us to a crawl. 20 minutes of rest now might save hours later. Stonebear's dark eyes flashed with momentary anger at the logic from a white man, but the bead of sweat trickling down his temple betrayed his condition. With a reluctant nod, he sank to the ground, pride warring with practicality on his face. They found a sheltered spot beneath a massive pine, where Nahimana redressed his wound while Mitchell kept watch. The herb she had applied earlier had helped, but the infection was clearly spreading. Stonebear's arm had swollen to nearly twice its normal size, and red streaks extended from the wound toward his shoulder. Blood poisoning, Mitchell said quietly to Nahimana when Stone Bear had drifted into a fitful sleep. He needs a doctor. There are no doctors here, she replied, her voice tight with worry. Only the old ways. She touched the stone talisman around her neck, similar to the one Kiona wore. And they are not enough for this. Mitchell studied her face, seeing the fear she tried to hide. You care for him. He is like a brother to me, she said simply. He and Grey Wolf took us in when no one else would. Her expression hardened with resolve. I will not lose another family. As Stone Bear slept, Mitchell took the opportunity to study Holloway's journal again, focusing on the passages about the Valley of Shadows and the caves. The professor's descriptions grew increasingly fragmented and mystical as he wrote about his approaches to the sacred site. The valley resists intrusion. 3 times I have tried to enter, 3 times turned back by storms that arose from nowhere, by rock slides with no apparent cause, by an overwhelming sense of dread that seeped into my very bones. The Apache guide laughed at my fear. The ancestors decide who enters, he said, not you. But tomorrow I try again, this time with the stone talisman he gave me. A protection, he claims, though I suspect it is merely a psychological crutch. Yet I find myself clutching it as I write these words, drawing comfort from its smooth surface. Strange how quickly rational thought abandons us in the face of the unknown. Mitchell looked up from the journal to find Nahimana watching him. What is it? She asked, noting his troubled expression. He hesitated, then showed her the passage. Holloway tried to enter the valley several times before succeeding. He mentioned a talisman like the ones you and Kiona wear. Nahimana's fingers instinctively rose to the stone pendant. Kaya Anan, she said, the words carrying reverence. It means Earth's heartbeat in our tongue. Each stone is unique, formed where lightning strikes the ground. They resonate with the spirits dwelling in all things. She caressed the smooth surface, lost momentarily in memory. Most Apache feel only whispers through these stones, comfort, warnings perhaps. But for a few, like your sister, Mitchell supplied. Nahimana's eyes met his. The gift manifests once every few generations. Our grandmother could speak with thunderstorms. My mother could heal with rainwater collected during the moon's fullness. A wistful smile touched her lips. Kiona, her connection surpasses even theirs. The elders believe she may be Keya Nale, chosen by the mountain spirits themselves. And you? Mitchell asked, curious. A shadow passed across her face. I feel echoes, nothing more. She reached for the journal. May I? Mitchell handed it to her, watching as she flipped through the pages. Her expression grew increasingly concerned. He knew more than he should have, she said finally. Names, places, ceremonies that are not shared with outsiders. Someone must have told him. Yes, Stone Bear said, his voice hard as he woke from his fitful sleep. Someone betrayed sacred trust. The implication hung between them. The same person might now be helping Knox. Before Mitchell could pursue this disturbing thought, Stone Bear struggled to sit up. How long? He demanded. An hour, Nahimana replied. You needed it. Stone Bear glanced at the sun's position, then at the tunnel entrance they had emerged from. They will be coming soon. We must reach the valley before them. Despite his weakened condition, Stone Bear insisted on continuing immediately. They helped him to his feet and once again set off through the forest, heading toward the distant peak. The going was difficult, the terrain increasingly steep and rocky as they approached Eagle Peak. Stone Bear leaned heavily on Nahimana now, his face gray with pain and exhaustion. Mitchell led the way, rifle ready, scanning constantly for signs of pursuit. As they rounded the shoulder of Eagle Peak late in the afternoon, the Valley of Shadows finally came into view. Mitchell stopped short, understanding immediately why it bore that name. The valley lay like a wound in the earth, deep and narrow, its floor hidden in perpetual shadow cast by the steep walls rising on either side. A stream glinted occasionally where sunlight penetrated the gloom, but most of the valley remained veiled in darkness despite the bright day. There, Nahimana said softly, pointing to a distant cliff face on the valley's far side. The weeping woman. Mitchell squinted, making out a rock formation that indeed resembled a woman's face, frozen in an eternal expression of sorrow. Water trickled from a crevice near the eyes, creating the illusion of tears. The entrance to the caves is there? He asked. Beyond it, she corrected. The weeping woman guards the path. They began their descent into the valley, picking their way carefully down the steep slope. The temperature dropped noticeably as they entered the shadows, a chill that seemed to seep through clothing and into bone. Halfway down, Mitchell paused, a prickle of awareness raising the hairs on the back of his neck. He turned slowly, scanning the ridge they had just descended from. There, a flash of movement quickly suppressed, and another further along the ridge. We're being watched, he said quietly to Nahimana. At least 2 men on the ridge. She followed his gaze, her body tensing. Knox. Mitchell calculated distances and angles. They must have circled around while we were in the tunnel, coming in from the east instead of following directly. How many? Stone Bear asked, his voice weak but determined. Can't tell from here. At least 2 on the ridge, but there could be others. A shot suddenly rang out, the bullet kicking up dirt near their feet. More shots followed, forcing them to scramble for the dubious cover of a boulder. They're hurting us, Mitchell realized as bullets continued to impact around them, never quite hitting but keeping them pinned, driving us down into the valley. Why not just kill us? Nahimana wondered. Stone Bear's face darkened with understanding. Because they still need us, need you to find the entrance to get past the Guardians. Then we don't give them what they want, Mitchell said, checking his rifle. We make a stand here. Stone Bear shook his head weakly. No, we go to the caves. With them right behind us? Mitchell protested. We'd be trapped. A smile touched Stone Bear's fevered face. The first Mitchell had seen from the stoic warrior. The caves are never a trap for those the ancestors welcome, he said cryptically. Trust me, white man. For once in your life, trust an Apache. Mitchell looked to Nahimana, who nodded her agreement. He's right. Our best chance, our only chance, is to reach the caves before they can catch us. Another volley of shots peppered their position, one bullet ricocheting off the boulder with a whine of protest. Decision time. All right, Mitchell conceded. We run for it. I'll provide covering fire while you 2 get a head start. No, Nahimana said firmly. We stay together. She glanced at Stone Bear's weakened state. We'll need your strength to get him there. Mitchell wanted to argue, but knew she was right. Stone Bear could barely stand on his own, let alone run. On my mark, then, he said, positioning himself to fire uphill. Ready. Go. He fired several shots toward the ridge, not aiming to hit, but to force their pursuers to take cover. Then he helped Nahimana with Stone Bear, and together they half ran, half stumbled down the remaining slope into the valley's depths. Bullets followed them, kicking up sprays of dirt and stone, but the shooter's angle made accuracy difficult. By the time they reached the valley floor, the gunfire had ceased, their pursuers presumably making their own way down to follow. The valley bottom was eerily quiet, the stream's gentle gurgle the only sound breaking the stillness. Ancient pines grew in twisted shapes, their needles a carpet beneath their feet. The air felt heavy, charged with something Mitchell couldn't name, but could definitely feel, an expectant pressure, as if the very atmosphere was awaiting something momentous. This way, Nahimana urged, guiding them toward the far cliff face where the weeping woman watched with her endless tears. As they moved deeper into the valley, a fog began to rise from the ground, curling around their ankles, then their knees. Within minutes, visibility had dropped to mere yards, the mist thickening until the world beyond arm's reach became indistinct shadows. Stay close, Nahimana warned. It's easy to become lost here. Mitchell felt it, the disorienting effect of the mist, the way landmarks seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles. Only Nahimana moved with confidence, navigating by signs or instincts he couldn't perceive. Behind them, shouts echoed as their pursuers entered the fog, commands to stay together, curses of frustration as the mist confounded them. The voices seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, impossible to pinpoint. The fog, Mitchell realized, it's protecting us. The ancestors protect their own, Stone Bear murmured, his voice fading as his strength ebbed further. The valley knows. The Apache warrior's knees buckled suddenly. Mitchell caught him before he could fall, alarmed at the heat radiating from Stone Bear's body. The infection had taken firm hold, sending him into the delirium of high fever. He can't go much further, Mitchell told Nahimana. We need to reach the caves now. She nodded, face set with determination. We're close. The entrance is just beyond that outcropping. She pointed to a dark shape looming in the mist ahead. As they approached, the fog parted just enough to reveal the base of the cliff, where the weeping woman's tears created a small, clear pool. The rock face appeared solid, with no visible opening. "I don't see an entrance," Mitchell said, scanning the cliff. Nahimana carefully lowered Stone Bear to the ground beside the pool, then removed the stone talisman from around her neck. "Watch," she instructed, dipping the stone into the pool. The water rippled, then stilled. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, like an image emerging in a developing photograph, symbols appeared on the rock face, ancient pictographs glowing with a faint blue luminescence. Nahimana placed her hand on one of the symbols, and a section of the cliff face shimmered, revealing an opening that had been perfectly concealed. "The Guardian's Path," she said, her voice hushed with reverence. "Beyond lies the place where ancestors rest." Mitchell stared in astonishment. Whatever rational explanation might exist for what he was witnessing escaped him completely. He helped lift Stone Bear, who had now lapsed into unconsciousness, and together they carried him through the hidden entrance. Inside, a narrow tunnel sloped gently downward, illuminated by the same ethereal blue glow that had revealed the entrance. The air was cool but not cold, and held a subtle fragrance Mitchell couldn't identify, something ancient and clean. They had gone perhaps 50 yards when voices echoed from behind them. Knox's men had found the pool. "They won't see the entrance," Nahimana assured him, though her pace quickened. "Not without the stone." "You're sure?" A scream from outside answered his question, a sound of pure terror that cut off abruptly. Then another and another, the sounds of men encountering something beyond their comprehension. "What's happening to them?" Mitchell asked, disturbed despite himself. "The Guardians protect the sacred," Nahimana replied. "Those who come with darkness in their hearts find darkness waiting for them." They continued deeper into the earth, the tunnel widening gradually until it opened into a vast chamber that took Mitchell's breath away. The ceiling soared overhead, lost in shadows despite the blue glow that emanated from the walls. Stalactites hung like stone daggers, matched by stalagmites rising from the floor. And everywhere on walls, ceiling, floor, were paintings, carvings, symbols recording the history and knowledge of the Apache people. But what drew Mitchell's eye most was the center of the chamber, where a pool of water larger than the one outside reflected the ghostly light. Around it stood stone figures, not statues carved by human hands, but natural formations that uncannily resembled human forms, as if the earth itself had grown them from the cave floor. "The ancestors," Nahimana said softly, guiding them toward the pool. "They will help him." They laid Stone Bear beside the pool's edge. His breathing had grown shallow, his skin gray beneath its natural copper hue. The infection was winning. Nahimana knelt beside him, her face transformed with purpose and concentration. She dipped her hands into the pool, and Mitchell noticed an immediate change. The water seemed drawn to her fingers, clinging like mercury, glowing more intensely where it touched her skin. "Now you will see what a daughter of healers can truly do," she said, her voice taking on a resonant quality it hadn't possessed before. "Here, where the water remembers all Apache who have ever lived, my gift awakens fully." She pressed her water-coated hands to Stone Bear's wound and began to sing. Not the simple melody she had used with herbs in the tunnel, but something ancient and complex. The song seemed to have physical form, echoing back from the cave walls with harmonies no single human voice could create. "Will this heal him?" Mitchell asked, transfixed by the transformation in both Nahimana and the water. "The ancestors and I will heal him together," she replied, her eyes now reflecting the pool's blue glow. "My mother's bloodline carries this gift, to speak with water, to ask it to cleanse what is poisoned, to mend what is broken." As Mitchell watched, something extraordinary began to happen. The blue glow intensified around them, pulsing in rhythm with Nahimana's song. The water on Stone Bear's wound seemed to come alive, spreading across the infected area like a sentient creature, drawing out darkness like ink pulled from cloth. Where the blackness touched the pool, small flashes of light consumed it, as though the water itself were devouring the infection. Stone Bear's breathing eased, the unnatural heat radiating from his body cooling visibly. Under Nahimana's hands, the angry red flesh around his wound began to fade to a healthy copper tone, the torn edges knitting together before Mitchell's eyes. Stone Bear's back arched suddenly, a gasp escaping his lips. His eyes flew open, but they were not seeing the cave. They were seeing something else, something that made him cry out in his native tongue. Nahimana continued her singing, tears streaming down her face as she worked. So focused were they on Stonebear's transformation that neither noticed the figure emerging from a side tunnel until his voice shattered the ancient silence. "Impressive," Raymond Knox said, stepping into the chamber with a revolver trained steadily on Nahimana. "Native mumbo-jumbo and a little phosphorescence. No wonder Holloway lost his mind over this place." Mitchell reached for his rifle, but Knox's gun swiveled to cover him. "I wouldn't," the man warned. "I'd hate to damage any of these fascinating artifacts with your blood." Raymond Knox was not what Mitchell had expected. Instead of the rough-hewn frontier businessman he had imagined, Knox was refined, almost aristocratic in bearing, silver-haired, impeccably dressed despite the journey, with the cold eyes of a predator accustomed to getting what he wanted. "How did you find the entrance?" Nahimana demanded. Her song halted mid-verse. Knox smiled thinly. "I had help." He gestured, and another figure emerged from the tunnel behind him. Mitchell felt Nahimana stiffen beside him as recognition dawned. The newcomer was Apache, an older man with a deeply lined face and eyes that refused to meet theirs. "We Matin," Nahimana whispered, her voice breaking with betrayal. "We saw him." The old Apache looked at the floor, shame evident in every line of his body. "He has my grandson," he said simply. "At his ranch, working in conditions no better than slavery. He promised to free him if I let him here." "And you believed him." Stonebear's voice was weak but clear. His consciousness apparently returned during the exchange. Wimatin had no answer for that. Knox surveyed the chamber with proprietary interest. "Quite a discovery," he remarked. "Worth far more than I anticipated, I suspect. Not just the mineral rights, but the archaeological value alone." He gestured at the symbols covering the walls. "Universities would pay fortunes for access." "This place is sacred," Nahimana protested. "It belongs to the Apache." "My dear girl, nothing belongs to the Apache anymore," Knox replied with patronizing patience. "Your people lost that right when they were defeated. This land, everything on it and under it, belongs to progress now, to the future." "Your future," Mitchell observed. "Naturally." Knox's cold gaze assessed him. "You're the bounty hunter who's been causing my men so much trouble. Mitchell Calloway, if I'm not mistaken." Mitchell said nothing, gauging distances and angles, looking for an opening. "A long way from Santa Fe, Mr. Calloway. A pity you won't be returning." Knox's revolver shifted, taking aim at Mitchell's heart. "Nothing personal, you understand, just business." As his finger tightened on the trigger, a low rumble began beneath their feet. The blue glow pulsed more rapidly, and the water in the pool began to ripple, though no wind disturbed its surface. Knox faltered, glancing around in momentary confusion. It was all the opening Mitchell needed. He launched himself sideways, colliding with Nahimana and Stonebear, bringing them all down behind the protection of one of the stone ancestors. As Knox's shot cracked through the chamber, the rumbling intensified, stalactites shivering overhead. Dust and small stones began to rain down from the ceiling. "What's happening?" Knox demanded, his composure cracking. Wamatin's eyes widened with understanding and fear. "The ancestors wake," he said, backing toward the tunnel. "They protect their own." A larger tremor shook the cave, sending Knox staggering. The pool's surface churned now, as if boiling, the blue glow brightening to an almost painful intensity. "Get out!" Wamatin cried, turning to flee. His warning was cut short as a massive stalactite broke free from the ceiling, plummeting toward the center of the chamber. Mitchell didn't see if it struck anyone. He was fully occupied with shielding his companions from falling debris as the cave seemed to tear itself apart around them. Through the chaos, he heard Nahimana resume her singing. The melody somehow cut through the cacophony of breaking stone and rumbling earth. The stone figure they sheltered behind began to warm beneath Mitchell's touch, as if coming alive. "What's happening?" he shouted over the din. Nahimana's eyes met his, filled with a mixture of awe and fear. "The caves defend themselves," she replied, "and us." A scream echoed through the chamber, Knox or Wematin. Mitchell couldn't tell which. Then another tremor, stronger than any before, and the sound of rushing water. The pool had overflowed its banks. the silvery liquid flowing with purpose toward the tunnel entrance. As Mitchell watched in disbelief, the water rose up like a living thing, forming a barrier across the opening. Beyond it, he caught a glimpse of Knox, face contorted with rage and terror, firing his revolver uselessly at the liquid wall before him. The bullets passed through without effect, splashing into the stone beyond. Then the ceiling gave way completely, tons of rock crashing down to seal the entrance forever. The last Mitchell saw of Raymond Knox was the man's expression of dawning comprehension that some forces could not be bought, controlled, or defeated. Not with money, not with guns, not with all the power of the changing world outside. As suddenly as it had begun, the trembling stopped. The blue glow dimmed to a softer radiance. The pool returned to its placid state. In the sudden silence, Stone Bear's voice sounded unnaturally loud. "The ancestors have judged," he said. His hand, when Mitchell looked down, no longer bore any sign of infection or wound. The skin was smooth, unmarked, as if he had never been shot at all. "Are we trapped?" Mitchell asked, surveying the sealed tunnel entrance. Nahimana shook her head. "There is another way out, the true path." She helped Stone Bear to his feet, his strength apparently restored. "The ancestors would not save us, only to entomb us." "And Wemington?" Mitchell asked, searching for the betrayer's body among the rubble. "He made his choice," she said harshly. "Let the ancestors judge him." Nahimana touched the stone figure that had protected them, her fingers tracing the weathered surface with reverence. "Thank you, grandfather," she whispered. As they gathered themselves to find this other exit, Mitchell realized that whatever rational explanations he might have clung to had crumbled along with the cave ceiling. He had witnessed something beyond his understanding today, something that defied the orderly world of cause and effect. He had always believed in the power you spoke of, he said to Nahimana. "It's real. As real as the earth beneath your feet," she confirmed. "As real as the air you breathe. The ancestors are not gone, Mitchell Calloway. They are merely waiting, watching, protecting what remains of our ways." Stone Bear, fully recovered, now studied Mitchell with a new expression. Not quite acceptance, but no longer open hostility. "You have seen," he said simply. "Now you understand why these places must remain hidden from your kind." Mitchell nodded slowly. "Yes," he agreed. "I understand." As they prepared to follow Nahimana deeper into the caves, seeking the true path out, Mitchell cast one last glance at the sealed tunnel where Raymond Knox had met his fate. The man had represented everything Mitchell had once been part of. The relentless march of civilization over native lands, cultures, beliefs. The certainty that progress justified any cost. Now standing amid the ancient power of the place where ancestors rest, Mitchell finally understood the magnitude of what was being lost, and what perhaps he could still help preserve. The deeper chambers of the cave system stretched before them like the veins of a living being, pulsing with the same ethereal blue light that had guided their entry. Mitchell followed Nahimana and Stone Bear through passages that seemed to shift and change even as they traversed them, creating the unsettling impression that the cave itself was alive, consciously deciding their path. "How do you know where to go?" Mitchell asked, his voice hushed in the ancient silence. Nahimana touched the stone walls as they walked, her fingers tracing symbols invisible to Mitchell's eyes. "The ancestors leave signs for those who can read them." Stone Bear moved with renewed vigor, his miraculous healing apparently complete. The Apache warrior's demeanor had changed subtly since the confrontation with Knox. He walked with reverent purpose now, occasionally murmuring words in his native tongue, prayers or thanks, Mitchell couldn't tell which. They had been walking for perhaps an hour when the passage widened suddenly into another chamber, smaller than the first but no less awe-inspiring. Here, the blue glow emanated primarily from crystals embedded in the walls, countless shards that caught and amplified the light, scattering it like stars in a midnight sky. In the center of this chamber stood a circle of stone pedestals, each bearing an object. A bow, an intricately woven basket, a medicine pouch, clay vessels decorated with geometric patterns, a warrior's headdress. Around the pedestals, the floor was inlaid with a spiral pattern that led to the circle's center, where a fire pit contained ashes so ancient they had turned to stone. "A council chamber," Nahimana explained, her voice dropping to a whisper. where the great leaders of all Apache bands once gathered in times of need. Mitchell gazed at the artifacts, understanding their immeasurable historical value. Museums would pay fortunes for such pristine examples of native craftsmanship and culture. Yet here they remained, undisturbed for generations, serving their original purpose rather than becoming curiosities behind glass. Stone Bear approached one of the pedestals, the one bearing the warrior's headdress, and knelt before it, head bowed. After a moment of silent communion, he rose and turned to Mitchell. "My father's father was a great war chief," he said, his voice carrying an unfamiliar note of openness. "He sat in this circle, wore this headdress, spoke for our people when the first soldiers came." His eyes held Mitchell's. "He counseled peace, understanding, believed your people could be reasoned with." The unspoken conclusion hung between them. He had been wrong. "I'm sorry," Mitchell said, the words inadequate but sincere. Stone Bear nodded once, accepting the apology for what it was. Then he turned to Nahimana. "We should not linger here. The way out lies beyond." They passed through the council chamber and into yet another tunnel, this one sloping gradually upward. The air grew fresher as they progressed, suggesting they were approaching the surface. Eventually, the blue glow began to fade, replaced by a different quality of light, natural daylight filtering from somewhere ahead. The tunnel ended at a seemingly solid rock face. Nahimana approached it confidently, placing her palm against the stone. Unlike the dramatic opening at the Weeping Woman entrance, this exit revealed itself with subtle grace, the rock face simply becoming transparent, then insubstantial, allowing them to step through onto a small ledge overlooking a hidden valley. Mitchell emerged last, blinking in the late afternoon sunlight. They stood high on a cliff face, a natural path leading down to a verdant valley nestled between protective peaks. A crystal-clear lake occupies the valley center, fed by numerous streams cascading from the surrounding heights. Along its shores stood a small village of traditional Apache wickiups, with people moving about their daily tasks. Children played near the water's edge, while elders sat in the shade of ancient pines. "Grey Wolf's people," Nahimana explained, relief evident in her voice. They reached the sanctuary safely. Stone Bear scanned the village, his posture relaxing as he spotted familiar faces. "And Kiona is with them," he added, pointing to where the young girl sat with a group of elders, apparently deep in conversation. Mitchell studied the hidden valley with the tactical eye of a former military officer. The single visible approach was a narrow path to the north, easily defended by a handful of warriors. The high cliffs provided vantage points to spot anyone approaching from miles away. Water, game, and edible plants were plentiful. It was a perfect refuge, one that could sustain the Apache indefinitely if necessary. "Your people could stay here," he observed, "safe from knocks, from the army, from everything outside." Nahimana shook her head sadly. "For a time, perhaps, but the world beyond these mountains grows smaller every day. Railways, telegraphs, more settlers." She gazed at the peaceful scene below. "Eventually, even this place would be found. Besides, we were not meant to hide forever. Apache are a proud people, meant to live under open skies, to move with the seasons." "Then what will you do?" Before she could answer, a shout from below alerted the village to their presence. Figures began moving toward the path that led up to their ledge, Kiona in the lead, running with the boundless energy of youth. The reunion was joyous. Kiona threw herself into her sister's arms, speaking rapidly in Apache. Grey Wolf followed more sedately, embracing his son with dignified emotion. Others gathered around, expressing relief and asking questions about what had transpired. Mitchell hung back, acutely aware of his outsider status. Eventually, Grey Wolf approached him, his weathered face solemn but not unwelcoming. "My son tells me you fought bravely," the old chief said, "that you helped protect the sacred caves." "I did what was right," Mitchell replied simply. Grey Wolf studied him with eyes that seemed to see beyond the surface. "Few white men know what is right when it comes to Apache ways." He gestured toward a large wickiup at the village's center. "Come, the council will wish to hear what happened." The council meeting lasted well into the evening. Seated around a central fire in the spacious wickiup, Mitchell listened as Stone Bear and Nahimana recounted their journey, the confrontation with Knox, and the cave's supernatural defense. The assembled elders, men and women of various ages all bearing the dignity of leadership, asked occasional questions, but mostly listened in grave silence. When the tale was complete, an elderly woman spoke. Her face was deeply lined, her silver hair worn in traditional braids, but her eyes remained sharp and alert. "The ancestors have spoken clearly," she said, her voice carrying surprising strength. "The caves must be sealed permanently. The knowledge they contain is too dangerous in the wrong hands." "But grandmother," Nahimana objected, "that knowledge belongs to our people. It is our heritage, our history." "And what good is history to a people with no future?" the old woman countered. "If the white men find the caves again, they will destroy everything. Better the knowledge sleeps safely than dies forever." A murmur of agreement passed through the assembly. Grey Wolf nodded thoughtfully. "Sky Mother speaks wisdom. The world changes around us. What protected our ancestors may not protect our children." Stone Bear, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. "There is another way." All eyes turned to him. "Explain, my son," Grey Wolf encouraged. "The symbols on the cave walls, the stories they tell, these can be transferred to other forms. Hides, cloth, even the white man's paper." Stone Bear's voice grew passionate. "We can create copies, hidden separately, entrusted to different families. If one is lost or destroyed, others will survive." "That would take years," an elder objected. "Then we take years," Stone Bear replied firmly. "What is time against the survival of our ways?" The council fell into discussion, weighing options and risks. Mitchell remained silent, knowing this decision was not his to influence. He found himself admiring the thoughtfulness of their deliberation. No hasty judgments, no domineering voices, just a community seeking consensus on a matter of vital importance. Eventually, Grey Wolf raised a hand for silence. "We will consider Stone Bear's proposal. Those with the skill to copy the sacred symbols will begin when the moon is next full." He looked around the circle. "In the meantime, we must decide our more immediate future. We cannot remain in this valley indefinitely." "The reservation at San Carlos," one elder began, "is a death camp," another interrupted. "Disease, starvation, the soldiers' cruelty." "But what choice do we have?" the first responded. "Where else can Apache go now?" An unexpected voice entered the conversation. Kiona, who had been sitting silently beside her sister, suddenly spoke. "The high country to the north, beyond the territory line." All eyes turned to the young girl in surprise. Children did not typically speak in council unless invited. "Explain, little sister," Grey Wolf said gently, showing no offense at her breach of protocol. Kiona's voice grew more confident. "I dreamed of a place 3 nights ago. A valley like this one, but larger, with a forest of tall pines and a river that runs cold even in summer. Game is plentiful there. The land remembers Apache feet from long ago." The elders exchanged glances. Dreams held special significance in Apache culture, particularly from one with Kiona's gifts. "Where is this place?" Sky Mother asked. "I can feel it," Kiona replied, touching her stone talisman. "The earth will guide us there." Grey Wolf nodded slowly. "Perhaps the ancestors show us a new path." He turned to Mitchell, including him in the conversation for the first time. "You know the territories to our north. Is there such a place as the girl describes?" Mitchell considered the question carefully. "There are valleys in the high country beyond the territorial line that match that description, areas rarely visited by white settlers, too remote for most." He hesitated, then added honestly, "But nowhere is truly safe anymore. The railroads push further every year. Mining companies search every mountain for ore. Even the most distant places will eventually be found." "Then we need more than a hidden valley," Nahimana said, her mind working through the problem. "We need protection under the white man's law." "A reservation?" Grey Wolf asked skeptically. "No, a treaty, one that guarantees land that cannot be taken away." Nahimana turned to Mitchell. "Is it possible?" Mitchell wished he could offer hope, but his experiences had taught him bitter lessons about the government's treatment of native peoples. "Treaties have been made before," he said carefully, "and broken just as often when gold or silver is discovered, or when settlers want the land." "But not always," Nahimana pressed. "Not always," Mitchell acknowledged. "Usually when the land has no value to whites, or when those who signed the treaty have powerful friends in Washington. A thoughtful silence fell over the council. Finally, Grey Wolf spoke. We will consider all paths before us. Tomorrow we will decide which to follow. He gestured to Mitchell. You have shared our council fire and spoken true words. You are welcome to rest here tonight. The council dispersed, leaving Mitchell with mixed emotions. These people had welcomed him, trusted him with their sacred places and deliberations. Yet he felt helpless to offer them any real hope for the future. The bitter truth was that the forces of progress he had once served would eventually reach even this hidden valley. Outside, the night air was cool and crisp, stars blazing overhead in numbers rarely seen in more settled areas. Mitchell found a quiet spot away from the main encampment and sat, his back against a pine tree, contemplating the day's extraordinary events. He had witnessed things that defied rational explanation. The healing pool, the living stone, the cave's defense of itself. Yet he could not deny the evidence of his own eyes. There were forces at work beyond those recognized by civilized science, powers connected intimately to the land and its original people. Troubled thoughts? Nahimana's voice came from nearby. She approached and sat beside him, close but not touching. Many, Mitchell admitted. I've seen things today that I can't explain. Do all things need explanation? He considered this. I was taught so that understanding comes from breaking things down, categorizing them, finding their mechanism. Nahimana smiled in the starlight. And if some things resist being broken down, if they exist only as wholes, not parts, then my education is inadequate, Mitchell replied honestly. They sat in companionable silence for a time, watching the stars reveal slowly overhead. Around them, the hidden valley settled into night rhythms, soft conversations from nearby wiki-ups, the occasional laugh of children not yet asleep, the distant call of a night bird. What will you do now? Nahimana asked. Return to your bounty hunting? The question echoed her earlier inquiry, but this time Mitchell had an answer. No, he said, with quiet certainty. That life is finished for me. And what will take its place? Mitchell gazed at the starlit valley, an idea taking shape in his mind. Perhaps I could help your people, he said slowly. Not by fighting, there's been enough of that, but by speaking for you to those who might listen. Nahimana turned to him, surprised. You would do this? Because it's right, Mitchell said simply, and because I've spent too many years on the wrong side of right. Before she could respond, a commotion arose from the valley's northern edge. Warriors were gathering, weapons in hand. Grey Wolf emerged from his wiki-up, calling for silence. Mitchell and Nahimana hurried toward the disturbance. A scout was reporting to Grey Wolf, his words coming fast and urgent in Apache. What is it? Mitchell asked Nahimana. Riders approaching the valley pass, she translated grimly. Many riders armed. Impossible, Mitchell protested. Knox is dead. His men wouldn't continue without him. Not Knox, Stone Bear said, joining them with bow in hand. Soldiers, a full cavalry company. Cold dread settled in Mitchell's stomach. How did they find this place? Grey Wolf's expression was grim. That matters less than what they will do now that they have. He turned to his warriors. Prepare defenses at the pass. We must protect the women and children. Wait, Mitchell interjected. Let me speak to them first. If it comes to fighting, your people won't stand a chance against a cavalry company. Better to die free than live as prisoners, Stone Bear declared. No one needs to die, Mitchell insisted, or be imprisoned. Let me try. Grey Wolf studied him intently. You would stand between your people and mine. I would stand for what's right, Mitchell replied, meeting his gaze steadily. After a long moment, the old chief nodded. Go, but know this, if they come with violence in their hearts, they will find it waiting for them. Mitchell rode out alone on a borrowed horse, unarmed except for a white cloth tied to a branch, the universal signal for parley. The narrow pass that served as the valley's only conventional entrance wound between sheer rock walls for nearly half a mile before opening onto a wider plateau. It was there he encountered the cavalry. They were indeed a full company, at least 60 mounted soldiers in neat formation, led by an officer Mitchell recognized instantly, despite the decade that had passed since they'd last met. Captain Thomas White River, now wearing a major's insignia, had served with Mitchell during the early Apache campaigns. Unlike many officers, White River had earned a reputation for fair dealing with native peoples, even learning several tribal languages. Major White River, Mitchell called, bringing his mount to a halt 20 yards from the cavalry line. White River urged his horse forward, surprise evident on his weathered face. Captain Calloway, by God, is that you? He signaled his men to hold position and rode closer. Last I heard, you'd turned bounty hunter after Abaque. And last I heard, you'd been appointed Indian agent for the Chiricahua, Mitchell replied. What brings an Indian agent and a cavalry company to this remote location? White River dismounted, signaling Mitchell to do the same. When they stood face to face, the major's expression turned serious. Official business, I'm afraid. We're looking for a group of Apache who left the San Carlos reservation without permission, led by one called Gray Wolf. He studied Mitchell curiously, though I'm more interested in why Mitchell Calloway is acting as their representative. It's a long story, Mitchell said. One I'm happy to share, but first, what are your intentions toward these people? White River glanced toward the pass behind Mitchell. My orders are to return them to the reservation, peacefully if possible. And if not possible? The major's face tightened. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. I've had my fill of blood. Mitchell believed him. White River had always been one of the rare officers who viewed the Apache as people rather than obstacles. There's something you should know before you proceed, he said. Raymond Knox is dead. White River's eyebrows rose. The land speculator? What has he to do with this? Everything. Mitchell proceeded to outline the events of the past days, Knox's pursuit of the Apache for their sacred knowledge, his use of mercenaries, his death in the caves. He omitted the supernatural elements, focusing instead on Knox's illegal activities and the Apache's legitimate defense of their sacred sites. When he finished, White River looked troubled. That's quite a tale. Knox had powerful friends in Santa Fe. They won't be pleased. Knox was breaking numerous laws, Mitchell pointed out, employing armed men to attack peaceful natives, attempted kidnapping, trespassing on sacred grounds. All true, White River acknowledged, but in these times, the law often looks different when applied to Indians versus white men. He sighed heavily. Still, I have some discretion in how I execute my orders. Meaning? Meaning I need to report that I found the missing Apache, but perhaps, he trailed off, thinking. Mitchell sensed an opening. Gray Wolf's people don't want to return to San Carlos. They've seen too much death there. They're seeking a new home further north. Outside my jurisdiction, White River mused. Exactly. And if they had an advocate, someone who could help establish a legal claim to land under a proper treaty, White River studied him with new understanding. You're proposing to help them resettle legally, become their advocate. Mitchell nodded. It's time I used what I know about the system to help those the system has failed. The major paced a few steps, considering. It could work, with the right connections in Washington, the right arguments. He turned back to Mitchell. But it would take time, and in the meantime, I still have orders. What if you could report that you found them, convince them to relocate, and are personally overseeing their move to a more suitable location? Mitchell suggested. Technically, you'd be fulfilling your orders while giving us time to establish a legal claim. Us? White River raised an eyebrow. I've chosen my side, Mitchell said simply. The major studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. The man I knew a decade ago wouldn't have stood here arguing for Apache rights. I'm glad to see some changes are for the better. He extended his hand. I'll help where I can, Calloway, but this won't be easy. There are powerful interests who want all Indians confined to reservations, regardless of conditions. I know, Mitchell acknowledged, clasping the offered hand. But these people deserve better. All of them do. They worked out the details quickly. White River would report that he had located Gray Wolf's band and was escorting them north to join relatives already settled peacefully. This would buy them time, perhaps a month, perhaps more, to reach the valley Keona had dreamed of and begin establishing their claim. I'll send word to contacts in Washington, White River promised. People who might support a new treaty approach, and I'll delay further pursuit as long as possible. Thank you, Mitchell said sincerely. As they prepared to part ways, White River asked the question that had clearly been bothering him. What happened at the caves, Calloway, really? Mitchell thought of the blue glow, the healing pool, the living stone. Some things defy explanation, Major. Let's just say I've learned that the Apache understand this land in ways we never will. He mounted his borrowed horse, and some knowledge is best left in their keeping. Mitchell returned to the valley with news that was received with cautious optimism. The council reconvened immediately, weighing White River's proposal against other options. Can this man be trusted? Grey Wolf asked. As much as any white officer can be, Mitchell replied honestly. White River has a reputation for fair dealing with the Apache. He was Cochise's friend in the last years of his life. This information clearly carried weight. Cochise, the legendary Chiricahua leader, was respected even by bands that had sometimes disagreed with his policies. And this plan to seek new lands with a treaty, Sky Mother asked skeptically, can such a thing succeed? It won't be easy, Mitchell admitted, but it's possible. There are people in Washington who believe the current reservation system is flawed. With the right approach, the right story, he looked at Nahimana, then Kiona. These people might listen. The council deliberated through the night. By dawn, they had reached their decision. They would travel north, seeking the valley of Kiona's vision, while Mitchell would work to secure legal protection for their new home. It was a gamble, but one that offered more hope than returning to San Carlos or living forever in hiding. Preparations for departure began immediately. The Apache were accustomed to moving efficiently, packing only what was necessary, leaving no trace of their presence. By midday, the hidden valley showed almost no sign that humans had ever dwelled there. As the band prepared to move out, Mitchell found himself standing apart, watching the organized chaos of departure. His path forward was clear now, yet fraught with uncertainty. The legal and political battles ahead would make facing Knox's guns seem straightforward by comparison. Having doubts? Nahimana asked, approaching silently. Concerns, Mitchell corrected. The system is stacked against your people. Even with the best intentions, I may fail. Then we fail together, she said simply. But first, we Tromau. Her quiet confidence steadied him. This woman had lost everything, parents, home, way of life, yet still found strength to fight for a future. How could he do less? There's something I need to do before we leave, Mitchell said, a decision crystallizing in his mind. Something I should have done long ago. Nahimana tilted her head questioningly. I need to make peace with my past, he explained. Truly let it go if I'm to be of any use in building a different future. Understanding dawned in her eyes. The sacred pool in the caves. Mitchell nodded. If it would be permitted, I will speak with Grey Wolf, she said. Wait here. She returned shortly with the chief and Sky Mother. The old woman studied Mitchell with penetrating eyes that seemed to reach into his soul. You seek cleansing, she stated rather than asked. I seek forgiveness, Mitchell replied carefully. From myself, if no one else. The pool does not grant forgiveness, Sky Mother said sternly. It reveals truth. Are you prepared for what it might show you? The warning gave Mitchell pause, but he nodded. I am. Grey Wolf exchanged glances with the old woman, then made a decision. Nahimana will guide you, but you must return before sundown. We cannot delay our departure. The return to the caves was made through the exit they had used the previous day, avoiding the sealed main entrance. The blue glow welcomed them as they entered, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. They made their way directly to the central chamber, where the healing pool still shimmered with its mysterious light. Nahimana led Mitchell to the pool's edge, then stepped back. You must enter alone, she instructed, with an open heart and mind. The ancestors will do the rest. Mitchell removed his boots and outer clothing, then stepped into the pool. The water was neither warm nor cold, but seemed to change temperature as it touched his skin, sometimes cool as mountain snow, sometimes warm as desert sand. He waded deeper until the water reached his chest. Then, following an instinct he didn't understand, he submerged himself completely. Beneath the surface, the world transformed. The blue glow intensified, surrounding him with light that somehow carried images within it. He saw scenes from his past play out before him. His enlistment in the army filled with youthful idealism, his gradual hardening as the realities of frontier warfare corrupted that idealism. The orders he followed that led to Apache villages burned, families displaced, children orphaned. And then Sand Creek, though he hadn't participated in the massacre, he saw it now through the eyes of those who had suffered, felt their terror, their confusion, their despair. The emotions crashed over him like physical blows, driving the breath from his lungs. Just as he thought he might drown in the weight of these memories, the vision shifted. He saw the small acts of kindness he had performed along the way. The Apache child he had saved from starvation after her village was destroyed. The prisoner he had secretly provided water when others denied it. His resignation from the army rather than continue participating in campaigns he knew were wrong. These moments didn't balance the scales. Nothing could, but they suggested a capacity for change, for growth, for choosing a different path. When Mitchell finally emerged from the pool, gasping for air, he found Nahimana waiting exactly where he had left her, though it felt as if hours had passed. "What did you see?" she asked quietly. "Everything," he replied, voice rough with emotion. "Everything I was, everything I could become." He looked at her with new clarity. The ancestors didn't offer forgiveness. "No," she agreed. "That is not their gift to give. But they offered understanding and perhaps purpose." "Where do I go now?" Mitchell stepped from the pool, surprised to find his clothes and skin already dry, as if the water had simply evaporated. "I know what I need to do now." As they prepared to leave the cave, Mitchell turned for one last look at the chamber that had changed him so profoundly. The blue glow pulsed once, brighter than before, as if in acknowledgement or farewell. Outside, the day was waning, the sun beginning its descent toward the western peaks. Grey Wolf's people would be ready to depart, beginning their journey north toward an uncertain future. But for the first time in a decade, Mitchell Calloway felt the weight of his past lifting from his shoulders. Not erased, never that, but transformed into something he could carry without being crushed by it. "Are you ready?" Nahimana asked as they started down the path that would lead them back to the valley. Mitchell took a deep breath of the clear mountain air, feeling it fill his lungs with new purpose. "Yes," he said, "I believe I am." What lay ahead would test them all: the physical journey north, the political battles in distant Washington, the challenge of preserving a way of life while adapting to a changing world. But in this moment, standing between the sacred caves behind him and the waiting Apache before him, Mitchell understood that he had finally found his true path. The road to redemption stretched before him, difficult but clear, and he would walk it one step at a time, alongside people who had every reason to reject him, but had chosen instead to accept his help. In that acceptance lay the seed of something he had thought lost forever: hope. As they rejoined Grey Wolf's band and began their northward journey, Kiona fell into step beside Mitchell. The young girl looked up at him with those fathomless eyes that seemed to see beyond the visible world. "The ancestors have touched you," she observed. "I can see their mark upon you now." "Is that good or bad?" Mitchell asked, curious about her perception. A small smile touched her lips. "It means you belong to this story now, our story." She touched her stone talisman, then unexpectedly reached out to take his hand. "The path ahead is long, but you will not walk it alone." From anyone else, the words might have sounded like simple encouragement, but coming from this child with her mysterious connection to forces beyond his understanding, they carried the weight of prophecy. As the Apache band moved north, away from the lands they had known toward an uncertain future, Mitchell felt something he had not experienced since before the war: the quiet certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. And for now, that was enough.